I had a boy I was working with and he had SM and, diagnosed, and everyone was focusing on it. And turns out when I would work with him in session, I would say stuff and he'd kind of look at me with a kind of a little bit of a blank look. And I noticed that as I gave him time to respond, he'd almost give me an answer after like the typical give and take. And he didn't look anxious. I need to say that because I think it's important to understand that kind of look, listen, and learn from these kids. They tell us a lot by just how they respond in general and how they look, their body language. This kid was not anxious. It turns out he had auditory processing difficulty. And when we gave him accommodations for that, he needed headphones in loud, large, lots of people environments. He needed to do certain tests in other rooms. He got distracted easy. He couldn't follow a series of directions. So the parent would get frustrated when she'd say, hey, Trevor, go upstairs and get your socks, your jacket, and your book. He'd come down and be like nothing in his hand or one thing. And she'd be like, come on, I told you, we're in a rush. We're in a rush. We're in a rush. He was so frustrated. So it caused a lot of behavioral problems. That's just one of millions of examples I can share. But I want to give a tidbit to our audience. The less socially anxious they are, the less they appear anxious, right? The more they seem comfortable, but yet they're still selectively mute. They're still mute in settings. They're not making that progress you think they should. The more these other disorders are prevalent. 100% correlation with the less anxious, the more comfortable a child feels, unless they're a speech phobic where they've had the high expectation of speech and they're stuck in the nonverbal, the professional mime kind of guy or girl. The more that we think about the others, the whys. And I think that's such an important quote, that the less anxious they appear, but they're selectively mute, the more you need to think about other disorders. Now, as children age and they become older kids and teens and adults, they may not seem that anxious. So they may get used to it, right? And so they're more avoidant. So it's all about figuring it out. But that correlation is, really important. And we talked about the ADHD, the executive function, but autism, 70 to 30% of kids can have comorbidities. We see so many kids at our center. Is it SM or autism? Is it both? And we see those misdiagnoses, the missing it. I mean, I'm working right now with a 15-year-old girl who literally, she can speak. They can speak. She's not as initiative. She's not elaborate. She's not interested in friends. She's not interested in practicing her goals, lacks internal motivation. When she's around other kids, she doesn't look anxious. She seems disinterested. There's a lack of motivation for friendships, for connection. Is that because of the years of failure, or is it because she really can't figure out the social puzzle? She has an oddity to her voice, like it's kind of a monotone talk, and she talks like that at home. And when we really, when you get a picture from the teacher, she just seems disinterested in social. We try to buddy her up. We try to give her areas of high interest, but she's focused on the interests, not the friendships. Anyway, she has autism and SM. So we were very adamant about do this testing. The parent was like, I don't think it is. And I'm like, look, unless we do this testing, I really can't tell you with certainty. She had level 1 autism. And I can't tell you again how many kids and then are misdiagnosed or mismanaged and they're funneled wrong. Or the kids diagnosed with autism and they don't have autism.
Right.
How many kids do we see at camp that come to us with a previous diagnosis or at our center and they don't have it? They have SM from an extreme social anxiety and avoidance. And many of these kids, like you said, they have an ADHD diagnosis. Right. There are comorbidities with ADHD and anxiety and ADHD and autism and yada, yada, yada. So it's really about figuring out that person. Yep. Sensory issues, Dr. Jenna. Gosh, 40 to 80% of kids, auditory, visual processing, tactile, loud, large, lots of people environments, brushing the hair, the food, the picky eaters. You got to know this when you're developing a treatment plan.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts? Share, please.
No, I think going back to what you were sharing in terms of the autism piece, because this is probably one of the most common diagnoses that we see a lot of these question marks for in terms of previous centers. I think a lot of the research out there, unfortunately, there are some people that don't believe that selective mutism and autism can occur at the same time. And so we do want to normalize that it definitely can. And we want to get that really out there because I think, unfortunately, there's families that are struggling in both realms. And we want to normalize that component of it and share, the aspects of how that can occur. I think in terms of the misdiagnoses, like you said, there's many families that come in and they unfortunately get a inconclusive report out. So basically, when a child is mute, a lot of times there are troubles with assessing them because there's verbal tasks that they're unable to assess. And so many times, unfortunately, tests can come back inconclusive. We see this often. And so we do assess nonverbal kids. Obviously, that's what we specialize in. So there are times where families will come and they'll provide us with their previous assessments that show inconclusivity, and we'll be able to, further assess them. Oppositely, like Dr. Reese said, there's times where, there are individuals that, maybe do have a previous diagnosis, or there's further testing where we're unsure if that's really the diagnosis that makes the most sense for them. And so we have done some reevaluations just to further explore that as well. So there's definitely like a lot of different aspects of ways that we can support, but I think that that's really important. And I want, you as listeners to know that, because I think that a lot of families feel very lost and feel very uncertain about what next steps they want to take or can take. And sometimes schools will share with them, like, listen, like this child's in the lowest reading support, and a mom's frustrated because she's like, well, I don't understand. My daughter's reading to her younger brother at home. Like, I know that she has this ability. So meanwhile, the daughter at school is now in the lowest reading level and she's bored because she's a really good reader. So we would want to explore and like provide more of that baseline of like a cognitive academic level. And then oppositely, we have kids that maybe do have an underlying reading or like dyslexia challenge, and they're not able to be assessed for that. And so we can kind of explore that. So if they're sitting in a space where, their teachers are having trouble and they're thinking it's just because they're shut down and they're timid, but rather they have that underlying challenge, we'd want to confirm that diagnosis. So it kind of works, like we're saying, it works both ends. And so I think it's definitely something that we want to ensure to families that we can talk through and we can work through, because like I said, I think there's a lot of families out there that don't always know like what that next step looks like. So